in a series of woes. Woe is sort of an onomatopoeic word in Hebrew. Oy. It's just a passionate expression of horror over judgment. So the first woe is against extensive materialism. You add house to house, field to field, so there's no more room, so that you have to live alone in the midst of the land. In my ears, says the Lord of hosts. In my ears, the Lord of hosts has sworn, surely many houses shall be desolate. Judgment's going to come on your materialism and your wealth, and great and fine ones are going to be without occupants. And your vineyards are going to produce famine-conditioned crops. That's what he's saying in verse 10. So God's going to judge your materialism. Second woe is in verse 11. The woe to those who rise early in the morning and may pursue strong drink, who stay up late in the evening that wine may inflame them. This is drunken pleasure seeking, banquets or parties accompanied by music. They do not pay attention to the deeds of the Lord, nor do they consider the work of their hands, which is probably the dissipation of their bodies. God's work of his hands is the creation of human bodies. So you have specifically in Israel, grasping materialism, drunken pleasure seeking. Verse 13 sums it up. My people go into exile for their lack of knowledge. Their lack of knowledge. They have turned against that revelation which God gave them. Verse 16 then, the Lord of hosts will be exalted in judgment. The holy God will show himself holy in righteousness. Then he comes to a third woe in verse 18. Woe to those who drag iniquity with the courts of a falsehood. This is defiant sinfulness. This is like having putting your sin on parade, putting all your sin in a cart and hooking up animals to pull the cart. In other words, this is parading your sin. And with a defiant attitude toward God in verse 19, you're saying to God, let him make speed, let him hasten his work that we may see it. Let the purpose of the Holy One of Israel draw near and come to pass that we may know it. If God doesn't like it, let me see him do something about it. This is scorn. This is mockery. This is shaking a fist in the face of God. Then they are characterized by moral perversion, as we saw in Romans 1. They call evil good. They call good evil. They substitute darkness for light, light for darkness. They substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. What begins to happen is they criminalize righteousness and they make laws to protect iniquity, which is exactly what we're seeing in our country. Dominated by grasping materialism, the wealthy become so wealthy that they overpower the entire culture, characterized by drunkenness, parties, characterized by defiant sinfulness, shaking their fist in the face of God, characterized by moral perversion. Everything is overturned. And righteousness is going to be criminal. You're going to be held responsible for hate speech if you say something against legalized sin. This is just the beginning. In verse 21, the fifth woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight, arrogant conceit. You go from moral perversion to arrogant conceit. And then it culminates in verse 22, woe to those who are heroes in drinking wine, valiant men in mixing drink, who justify the wicked for a bribe, take away the rights of the ones who are in the right, essentially corrupt leaders. So this is what a culture looks like when God has taken his hands off of it. It will be consumed with materialism. It will be defined by a drunken pursuit of pleasure and all manner of personal lustful fulfillment. It will be defiant about and open about its sinfulness. It will be characterized by every kind of moral perversion. It will not be humble about its condition, but rather arrogantly conceited about it. And it will all be driven by corrupt leaders. This is what a culture looks like that God has abandoned. From those probing indictments, you come to verse 24. and you have the judgment of God. Maybe I'm not going to go through all of that, but the best way to look at it is verse 26, God whistles and the Babylonians come. God whistles and a distant nation comes, and they devastate, they absolutely devastate the land of Israel, the people of Israel, massacre, slaughter, occupation, people taken captive. We're familiar with all of that history. We don't need to know a lot of details. They're just fearsome things in the ancient world. This army is fast, verse 26. It is unrelenting. It never stops. It never tires, verse 27. It is deadly, verse 29. It is powerful, verse 28, like a lion growling as it seizes its prey, and it growls over it in the day like the roaring of the sea. All of those things are indications of the power, devastating power of the Babylonian army. When they came, as you know, they began to come culminating their coming in 586 BC. So that is the punishment of the Lord. Now, all of that gets us to the 6th chapter of Isaiah, and I'm skipping some things because I want to make sure we get to this. So the question is this: if you happen to be alive in a culture that has been abandoned by God, well, what kind of person do you need to be? Right? What do you need to know? Because that's exactly where we are in this country. Everything that characterized that nation characterizes us. Everything that was true of the judgment cycle of Romans 1 is true of us. We've had a sexual revolution, a homosexual revolution, and now we're in the category of the reprobate mind, where we can never find our way back to sanity again because our minds don't function. And we're legalizing the insanity, and we're making laws to protect the insanity against reality. So we are in the insanity of the reprobate mind. We are driven by the very same sins categorically, the grasping materialism, the drunken pleasure seeking. We're driven by all of those things. Moral perversion and wicked leaders. So Isaiah gets this message, and the question is posed in his mind: what is going on? And what he needs is to find God. He needs to see God.